I'm Jane Bennett, and I'm the owner of Keystone Business Services. I've got over 20 years of experience with restaurant-specific accounting. I started my firm in 2009. We have every client from small independents to clients that have one location to 20 locations. We work with franchisees, franchisors. We've got clients have coffee shops, pizza shops, fine dining, and everything in between. So we're familiar with pretty much every concept out there. And like Chris said, what we really want is we want restaurant owners to know and understand their numbers, to have a good handle on the financial health of their restaurant. And so that's what we really primarily focus on. So currently, challenges to the restaurant owner, as if restaurant owners didn't have challenges just intrinsic to this restaurant industry right now. We're dealing with inventory and supply costs that are continually rising. Restaurant owners are having difficulty hiring staff. They're having difficulty keeping their existing staff. We've got supply chain issues. And then on top of that, you add the rising gas prices, which makes everything else challenging. It's creating rising inventory costs, difficulty hiring. Staff doesn't want to travel too far. Keeping your existing staff, if they're able to find a position closer to home, they're taking it. And then of course the supply chain issues. It's adding fuel to the fire.
And these things all work together to create one major concern for any operator who's listening today. And they all work together to basically squeeze your margin. You're in a very tight margin industry anyway. We all know that. Most restaurants work very, very hard to keep one dime on the dollar. Some of you are out there working, and if volume is dipped, you're getting less than that. And so these things all work together to do nothing more than squeeze that margin. We're going to have some more comments as we go along on each of those items. So,
absolutely. So I wanted to kind of just give a visual for the rising costs and erratic costs. These are actual costs from one of my clients, just to kind of show the reality of it. Cheese. Back in January, it's down here, and then it's going up, and then it's going down, and it's going up, to a high in February. Chicken breast, same thing. And chicken breast, that pricing just keeps going up, and that's getting nothing but worse. And is going to get worse because of the bird flu epidemic. Ground beef, same thing. Costs are just continually rising. The interesting thing that I wanted to note here was the price of lemons, for whatever reason, I don't know, but it's down, it's up, it's down, it's up, it's up, it's up, it's down. So this is just to show that it's difficult to keep a close eye on your costs. They're constantly going up, they're constantly going down. And what's a restaurant owner to do? I mean, what are they supposed to do? We're going to talk about that. Labor issues, restaurant owners, this is a huge problem, and it's not really just in the restaurant industry. This is not industry specific. Everybody is having issues. Nobody wants to work. Higher starting wage. You've got to offer to pay them more. You got to offer creative benefits just to keep them off the couch.
Okay.
Not only that, but your existing staff is being recruited by others. I'm sure that if you're a restaurant operator on this presentation, that you've had that where you've had a staff member come to you and say, hey, just to let you know, I'm going to go work for Joe over here at this restaurant because he's able to offer me just a little more money, or maybe some more incentives, or maybe some better benefits. Because they come in, they see Joe working or Steve working, and they say, hey, well, this guy looks good. Let's see if we can get him to come work for us. It's a challenge. So it's not easy out there right now. So what's a restaurant owner to do? Here's some options. For the rising inventory prices, it's time to analyze your menu items. I would suggest maybe pulling a PMIX report look at your items that are selling, look at your items that are not selling, and cut the dead weight. Is it time to raise menu prices? That's something to look at, always something to look at, especially with the rising cost of inventory. Utilizing third-party software to track pricing. There's a lot of options out there. There's Margin Edge, there's Extra Chef, there's several others, but this slide back here, we utilize Extra Chef, and this pricing came from Extra Chef. So it is very easy to utilize third-party software to track this pricing. Let them do the hard work for you. You don't have time to sit there with a spreadsheet to punch in the numbers every single week that these invoices come in. So, you know, invest in a third-party software for it to do it for you. It's going to be a very eye-opening experience.
That's a really important point that I just want to underline, everybody, that what we're talking about with the situation that we're stuck in is that the wise hands-on operators seem to be reaching out now and getting smarter. They are utilizing technology to help them manage their costs and know their information quicker. The neat thing about this type of technology is that it's getting more and more available, and it's also getting more reasonable. It used to be these kinds of programs were not the things that a small independent restaurant operator was able to afford. But the good news, as we all know, with technology that we use every day, whether it's website development or other things that aren't really related to today's topic, the good news is that every few years things find a way of becoming better, faster, but also less expensive. So using third-party software to track your inventory and keep your prices current is more important now than ever. And I have talked to a lot of you out there that seem to have said that because of the post-COVID issues with supplies, gas increases, my menu being in a state of flux because sometimes I can't get items, it's helped us menu smarter. And I think that was the first point. We're analyzing our menu more often now. You're running your product menu sales items, sit and meet with your staff. You're not making decisions based on just what you like or what you think is more popular. You're making decisions based on what seem to be really most popular to your customers. And you're cutting back some of the other items. And you're doing your menu updates more than just, say, twice a year or seasonally. You're reviewing your menu because you can, because this information is so readily available daily. You're reviewing your menu on a monthly basis now. That's what most people have been doing in order to stay ahead of the supply interruption and cost of goods.
Yes, we're seeing a lot of our clients with these third-party softwares. They usually have a recipe costing module that you can either add on or as a feature with it. And we're seeing a lot of our clients take the time to put in your recipes into these software systems, because you can easily and very quickly pull up that recipe to see has the cost of that recipe changed drastically with those rising inventory costs. So you're easily able to pivot, you know, to say, okay, hang on, this is, you know, this dish is continually just kind of steadily rising, and we're going to need to raise the menu cost on that. Or it's not selling, and it's, you know, the cost on it is rising, and it's not worth keeping on the menu. So those third-party softwares are really, they're really a good investment. For the labor crisis, you might look at considering reducing your hours. You know, looking at, do you have sales, you know, on Monday at lunch to cover the labor cost that it's, you know, and all of the overhead to keep that lunch open on Monday? Or maybe do we just, you know, open for dinner, or do we close on Mondays altogether? For your staff, compensation and culture is becoming huge. I mean, I know Chris wants to kind of touch on a few points on that, so I'll let him.
Well, you know, there really is a lot of scheduling practices that we're seeing now, because as Jane pointed out, there is an ongoing labor crisis. Those of you in the business know that hiring, training, and retaining staff has never really been easy. But now post-COVID, it's even worse. It's like everybody, opened at the same time. That we created so much demand for so few people. And some of the bright operators are telling me that they're adjusting their concepts to fit that smaller available market. It's because we're not necessarily assuming that we're going to ever just go back to the days of having, say, more choices. Some of the people that were hourly workers in the restaurant industry left the industry during COVID. Maybe they started working for a different industry totally. Now they're in a grocery store's warehouse, or they're delivering for UPS or Amazon, and they're not coming back. So yes, what we're finding is an increase in cross training, taking your employees that are very good in one position, but training them in others. And by training them in others, that makes them more valuable. People seem to stay longer where they're more involved and they're more valued. It also means that you can raise their income a little bit, but it also means that in the long run, you may be able to find that you're now able to work the same positions, but fewer people. So cross-training was always a very good principle. Now it's an absolute must. The people in the kitchen that can do prep, can they work the line? If people that are on the line that are very good at fry, can they do grill broil? That's an example. If you're in full service, are the servers also trained to become bartenders? Does that give you more schedule flexibility so that when you're shorthanded, you can move people around more easily? That's very, very important. Now, from a culture point, there is always some silver lining in these tough situations. And I've talked to more than a few hands-on independent operators that are saying, we seem to be able to get closer to our staff because of this. We fought through this together. We listened to some of their suggestions on how to switch our model when COVID made us close our dining room, and we laid off a ton of staff. And then of course we got twice as busy on the to-go front. So we had them help us with our concept switch. We had them help us with our curbside pickup. We had them give us their suggestions on our updated website or our social media marketing or our Instagramming. And based on that, we created more of a bond. So now that COVID has settled down and dining rooms are open, now what's happening is we have a closer bond with our staff. We want to keep that momentum. Keep whatever silver lining you have that came out of that tough situation. A gentleman in Fredericksburg talks about how he has his roundtable Tuesday afternoons, where staff just grab a complimentary cup of yogurt, sit with him between lunch and dinner shifts, and they just focus on how they can work in the current situation by delivering better service to their guests. And he said the suggestions that come out are one thing, but the bonding, the idea of people looking forward to working together and coming up with ways to help the business grow and help everyone stay together has really created more of a team. So there's a better positive sense of team that lowers retention. Some of the staff are actually helping him recruit some of the people that they like that work at other places. So that gives him one step up in this really tough employment environment than, say, other independents. So those are some of the things that you may be doing. If not, you may want to be trying, because it's really, really hard. And I wish I could say it's temporary and it's going to go away. But in our opinion, labor is going to just be looked at differently. We're going to have maybe fewer to choose from. It's a tighter market. We're going to have to get them involved more. We're going to have to compensate them higher. And the way we will win on this is by having happy people stay longer, because retention is what keeps you from having to have that circle of training wages, overtime, and things that happen when we're shorthanded. And it also goes back to that last point on the other side here about raising menu prices. Some of this additional compensation is covered because the public seems to have been accepting of restaurants that had to raise prices. Sometimes raising prices is something we're all hesitant to do, but right now, the public seems to be more accepting of the fact that it's just going to cost them more to shop. It's costing them more to order things. It's going to cost them more to eat out. So as long as these price increases are reasonable, you can do it, and it will help cover the additional compensation costs.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're right on that point, that the consumer is more accepting of that rising cost, because if they've been to the grocery store, at all, they understand it and they get it. I'm always curious to know how many restaurant operators have actually found people within their own restaurant, the employees that they have, that without the, wealth of employees applying for a position, that they've had to look at their own staff and say, okay, well, you know what, I wonder if this person would be great in this position. And that they've actually found, a better, maybe restaurant manager within their own pool of employees, than, had they been able to hire somebody directly. So I think it's, maybe sometimes good for the employees too, in this current market, that maybe they're getting opportunities that they wouldn't have had before. So I'm always curious to know that.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that you have to understand as a restaurant operator, or if you're an advisor out there, advising restaurant owners, you can talk to other restaurant operators, you can talk to other advisors, you can get all kinds of ideas of how to manage this current crisis, the labor crisis, the inventory, supply chain issues, but it is not going to matter if you are not looking at your numbers. And you can look at your numbers, but you also have to understand what you're looking at. So all the efforts are going to be for nothing if you're not looking at these numbers. So we have industry benchmarks within the restaurant industry, and cost of goods sold 28 to 32, labor cost 28 to 32, direct operating expenses 3 to 5, advertising and marketing 3 to 4, utilities 1 to 3, G&A expenses like your credit card fees, your insurance, things like that should be less than 10%. Repairs and maintenance, you want to keep it around 1 to 3%. And your occupancy cost should be no more than 10%. And when we say occupancy cost, we mean your base rent, your CAM, any kind of insurance or property taxes that the landlord is collecting from you.
Well, this is a real important slide for those of you in the business to make note of, because I know I work with an awful lot of independent operators, and that's one of the first questions is, am I in line? This is my first restaurant. The good news is I'm in the business and I'm busy. But am I as good as I'm supposed to be? What are my expenses supposed to be? So obviously, without searching out a financial expert like Jane, you may not know. So take a good look at those. Cost of goods now means everything that is a cost to create your menu. So it's going to be the food, and it's going to be the liquor, beer, and wine if you happen to have a liquor license. Though one thing that I want to point out is that the labor cost does mean total labor. Because sometimes people have a question about, well, that is my labor because that's all my employees. No, it's your hourly labor and your salary people if you have salary people. It's your taxes, your benefits, if you're paying people during training, and of course you have to. So it's training labor, it's overtime, it's all of it. And so that's kind of what that really means. Your expenses are divided by your total net revenue. That's another question that comes up. Except cost of goods, in order to make sure that that's accurate, I think Jane's going to show you in a later slide how the P&L really works, because a lot of times we mistakenly divide our food cost and it's by 100% of our sales, and that's not correct. So we're going to go into some further detail now to show you not just the benchmarks, but where they should be on a P&L and how you can make them work for you.
And also to your point about the labor costs, Chris, things that restaurant owners often don't think about, things like workers' comp, employee meals. So any kind of employee benefit. I know sometimes they'll have like incentive contests, who can sell the most wine, right? And you get a $500
Good point.
That's part of it too.
And what about you owner operators that are there? That if you are active in the business, if you are working as the general manager, you're opening, you're closing, you're making final decisions, you're there 5 days a week, maybe sometimes even 6 days a week or more, then if you're taking some type of a fee or a salary, it should be in that category. To be proper, so that because you're a working member of that unit. Now, for you owners out there that are supervising your unit, but you have managers and you have key staff and other hourly labor, then it would be better for you, if you are taking a fee, to put it elsewhere, not in labor, because you're not an active member of the working team. We'll probably show you a couple of those spaces as we go further along into the profit and loss statement.
So this is where presentation matters with your profit and loss statement. Typically, advisors out there, y'all are getting a P&L that comes in the format on the right. It's got the sales, it's got cost of goods, and then it has the expenses listed in alphabetical order. This is fine if you're, looking for, did I make a profit, or did I lose money? If you're looking to analyze the health of the restaurant and the industry benchmarks, then we need to have more of a presentation that is shown on the left. This is the National Restaurant Association format. And the reason it's like that is because it's going to put all these categories so that you can line up with the industry benchmarks. So you've got your sales presented, you've got your cost of sales. It's broken out, by your food, by your liquor, beer, wine. Then you've got your labor cost, so that we can see right away what your prime cost is, because we want to focus on that prime cost. And then to Chris's point, on the right side, typically that cost of goods sold is just divided by the sales, and that's your, that they say, oh, there's my costs. Well, that's great. That's your total cost of sales. But what we also want to know is what were your actual food sales versus what were your liquor, beer, wine sales, and the food sales the food costs need to be divided by the food sales, not the total sales. Otherwise, it's going to skew your numbers.
Hey, Jane, is there a way that this slide can be enlarged or if that's possible, just so it makes it a little bit easier to see? I don't know if you can, but.
Yes, but then it's.
Okay. Wow. There we go. And to Jane's point, what you're looking at now, I know a lot of people start with just a very typical, a QuickBooks kind of listing. The good thing here is you can at least accurately track revenue. You can list your expenses, and hopefully you have profit, net profit at the end. That's the good thing about this. But other than that, there isn't much you can take away. You can't manage your business better from this format. Whereas the restaurant categories on the left, now not only do you have an accurate display of revenue, expenses, and profit, but they're broken out in categories that make sense. They are divided properly by total sales or by category sales. So it's more accurate, and you can compare to the industry and work with it. So if you want to sit with your key people and go to work on something, more, you're better educated and can make smarter decisions. And that's the whole point behind knowing your numbers, is so that you can make quicker decisions and you can make better decisions.
Right, and the benefit of this format is because if you see down here under other operating expenses and you see direct operating expenses, and the percentage is 3.1%. Well, if you go back and you know what these benchmarks are, you know that your direct operating expenses should be 3 to 5%, then you're able to look at your P&L to see, okay, I'm within that benchmark. If you're an advisor and you're getting the format on the right, you're going to have to pick and pull out the numbers that make up that direct operating expenses. And so the format on the left is really, for ease of use and for the restaurant owner to look at it and say, okay, let's look and see where we're at. What do we need to work on? So that's why the presentation matters. So the prime cost, what is it? It's the most important percentage you can focus on in your restaurant. It's the percentage of your cost of goods sold and your labor costs in relation to your revenues. And like Chris says, that's your net revenues. And why should you care? You should care because those are the two largest expenses for your restaurant: the cost of goods sold and the labor. And those are the expenses that are directly within your control. They're directly within your manager's control. If you're an owner operator that is relying on key employees, then you've got your kitchen manager ordering all of the food. You've got your front of the house manager ordering probably the liquor, beer, wine. They're managing the schedule. So these two numbers need to be focused on, and so that you can focus on that prime cost. We often get, what should my prime cost be? Depends on the industry, or not the industry, but the concept that you have. A fine dining concept should be 65% or less. Fast casual should be 60% or less.
So again, I just want to underline that for those of you who are just beginning to kind of work with your numbers, if you're making that shift right now from the QuickBooks to the categories, you understand the targets and you're going to start working on your numbers. Prime cost is so important because it's almost sort of like the QuickBooks. It's sort of the Cliff Notes version. Whenever we look at numbers, if we look at the cost of you developing your menu and the cost of your labor, and together we know that you're at that 60%, maybe 65%, then before you go any further, you know that there's a real good chance that with these main things in line, that you are more than likely able to carry your debt, pay your bills, and have a little left over. But if you look at your P&L, once you get it organized correctly, real quick, and you see that, oh my heavens, I'm at 75% after I pay my people and pay my cost of goods. Before you even have to look further at what you might be able to do with tighter utilities or paper or credit card, fee renegotiation, you know that you've got a key issue to take a look at on managing your menu and trying to come to grips with managing your labor, because you know that you're not profitable before you go any further.
Just a simple visual math problem here. If we take the revenues and at the 100%, and on the left side of this chart are the industry benchmarks at the lowest. So the direct operating expenses were 3 to 5%. We're assuming that you're on the low end at 3%. Okay, and if we're assuming the low end of all of those categories, you come down here and you've got a profit margin of 12%, which is great. That's a great profit margin. If you're on the high end of those benchmarks, so if you're at the 5% of those direct operating expenses and on the higher end of all of the rest, you're down here and you have a 0% profit margin. Profit margins are thin in the restaurant industry to begin with. So it is imperative that you're looking at these numbers, that you're watching these numbers, because one little slip up, and it doesn't take much to make that profit margin go from 12% to 0%. So restaurant owners, there's daily, weekly, and monthly things that you can do to help keep an eye on these numbers. The number one thing I recommend that you do daily is to make sure to check your bank that you receive that credit card batch. So you can't do anything unless there's money in the bank. You can't pay your people, can't pay your vendors. So you need to make sure that the manager the night before properly batched out the sales so that you get that money in the bank the next day. Because sometimes it's not the manager, sometimes it's the credit card processor, sometimes it's the bank. And I've had instances where clients have gone, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. All of a sudden they get a call, this check bounce either from your employee or from your vendor. No, we have money in the bank. I don't understand. And they look and, oh, we haven't had a credit card deposit in 5 days. And it's not an overnight thing to fix, right? It's going to take 2 or 3 days to get that money rolling back in. So do yourself a favor, check the bank daily. You're also looking for any kind of fraud charges in this day and age. I mean, there's fraud just about every day in some form or another. So just take a daily check at that bank. It doesn't take very long. Just make sure, nope, everything looks good. Review the previous day's comps, voids, and employee meals totals. Let's just make sure that the employees aren't taking advantage of free meals or reduced cost meals. Let's look, did we have really high comps or voids yesterday? What was the problem? Was there something wrong? Did we have, something in the kitchen go wrong? Did we have a party that didn't like the food? Let's just talk about it. Talk with your managers about it. Let's talk about issues that we had yesterday. Let's talk about, did we have a great day, right? But get your managers involved in those conversations. Weekly checklist. So With the costs rising, what I'm finding is a lot of clients are developing like a weekly purchasing budget. They're, kind of projecting revenues for the week, projecting scheduling for the week, so that we can kind of get an idea of, okay, here's what we think, the sales should be this week. Let's, schedule labor accordingly, and then let's look at what we might be, needing to purchase. That way you're not overspending what you think that you're going to be making. Discuss the weekly labor schedule with your managers, based on those revenue expectations. If you're doing this weekly, then analyze last week's revenues, labor costs, and then purchasing to see, okay, this is what we budgeted, this is what we spent, how did we do? So that way you can kind of get an idea, do we need to do better? Is this working for us? Were we way off the mark? Let's find out why we were way off the mark, because you kind of want to get better at that. So that way you can feel confident that you're not overspending what the money is coming in. Monthly checklist. So now it's time to see how you compare with the industry benchmarks. Now it's time to sit down with your accountant, with your managers. Let's talk about where we are versus the industry benchmarks. If you're keeping any kind of internal prime cost numbers, so you're keeping track of the labor and the purchasing, let's look at your numbers versus what the accountant is showing you. Are we way off? You shouldn't be way off. If we're way off, then okay, we're missing something. We're missing some invoices. We're missing some petty cash. We're missing, we're missing something. But let's find out why, because we want those numbers to be tighter and closer together. Let's compare. If you prepare a budget, let's look at your budgeted numbers versus your actual numbers, and let's also use that to maybe create a better budget for the next month. Some people compare their year-to-date numbers with previous year-to-date numbers. That's a bit difficult to do right now because of COVID, and so the numbers are kind of skewed. But some are still looking at it to just kind of as an affirmation of, okay, we're doing better, because most restaurant owners are now doing better than they have been the previous 2 years. Meet with your managers to discuss concerns that are out of the labor and the cost of goods sold. So maybe you're talking about the direct operating expenses, the bar supplies, the kitchen supplies, guest supplies, equipment, rentals, things like that they have direct control over. I think the takeaway to both all the daily, the weekly, and the monthly checklist is to get your managers involved. Let them help you. Let them have accountability. Let them feel invested in the process. We're finding that a lot of managers, goes back to the whole culture that Chris talked about. If they feel like they're invested in, like they're part of the process, they're going to be a better employee for you, and it's going to matter to them. It's going to matter that you're taking the time to say, hey, here's what the numbers are. Let's talk about this, and let's talk about how we can all work together to get these numbers down. A lot of people are bonusing right now, and they're bonusing on the numbers. Can we keep these numbers within the benchmarks? Can we get them lower? So it's performance based. And so by making them a part of that conversation and a part of that solution, I think you're investing in those managers, and it makes them a better employee for you.
Well, that couldn't be more true. I think that being able to know your numbers first is our big point here. If you're an owner, and whether you're an owner operator or an owner, you want to make sure that you really know and understand your numbers. Mm-hmm. But the sub message through our presentation today is to share your numbers, what you can, share the information in order to better manage your business. Knowing your numbers, then getting it into action is what makes small restaurant operators smarter and makes their restaurant more profitable. So I think some of the most important things that Jane presented today are the last couple of slides. Give me some specifics of what I can do daily. What should I be doing weekly? And then how does this matter monthly? Because when we take a look at monthly P&Ls now, a well-run restaurant is almost looking at those as what we call confirmation of the state of your business, not necessarily information any longer. And the reason I say that, it's because if we go back to say, well, every day I'm looking at my sales, I'm looking at my comps, I look at my voids, I look at my labor, and I make sure my bank balance is accurate. Every week, I'm sitting with my couple of key people. Some of you might have larger restaurants with day and night managers, back of the house managers, kitchen managers, chefs, etc. Some of you might be small hands-on operators. So what you have are key assistants, front of the house and back. But I sit with them weekly and I share information about what our purchase budget should be, what our revenue number should be, what our schedule needs to cost. So if I know all of this weekly and I'm double checking things daily, then when by the, say, the 10th or 12th of May, when I'm getting my April profit and loss statements, it isn't the first time I've seen it anymore. It's not really information. It's confirming my trend and my weekly goals and telling me if I'm online. And if so, great. And if not, where I'm offline. Then I can sit with my key people and discuss what are we going to do about our increase in waste or our increase in cost of goods with our spike in seafood. Are we going to continue those daily specials? Are we going to change the menu a little bit? See, all of this dialogue that I'm having, you all can have once you know your numbers better. And then because you know your numbers, sort of sharing your numbers with the key people that are going to be able to help you run your restaurant better. Many operators have told me when I've worked with them that they felt like their numbers are something that are private. You know, what I do for sales, no one needs to know. You know, how much I have in the bank, no one needs to know. You know, how to run my business, no one needs to know. Well, I'm hoping that after today, maybe you all can realize that there's a way to do both. Your business is your business. And some specific things that don't really help operate the business are the types of things that don't necessarily need to be shared. Your profit and loss statement, for example, is just meant to help you manage the monthly business better. So whatever type of debt you have on the business, what you might owe on a loan, what you're doing with your profit, if you decide to take money for a company car, those aren't the kinds of things that we're talking about that are part of a daily report or a weekly managers meeting or a monthly P&L. So yeah, there are certain parts of the business that aren't necessarily helpful for key people and managers to know. However, everything else that Jane showed on the list, everything from your cost of goods, your labor, certainly all of your operating expenses, those things only help you get better if they're shared with the people that are on the front lines and working every day. So maybe occupancy costs and general overhead and corporate overhead and how you want to pay yourself, that stuff towards the bottom of the line you can cut off. But I don't know, Jane, you might want to speak to this a little bit more, but I think you're in situations that I get into as well, where we're working with restaurants and we start seeing tremendous relief in an owner, and we see tremendous increase in the management of numbers once the management and the staff really understand what the heck it costs to run that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right that a lot of restaurant owners don't necessarily want their managers or their key personnel to see the full P&L. They don't want them to see the bottom line, whether it's good or whether it's bad. They don't want to scare them, or they don't want them to say, oh, I see, you're making so much money, you could pay me more, right? So they don't want them to see that. So we provide an operations report to our clients that just details the sales, the cost of sales, the labor cost, and some of the operating expenses, maybe like the direct operating expenses and advertising and marketing, things that they have a little bit more control over. But that way they're seeing the things that they impact and the things that these key employees can help the restaurant owners on, but they're not seeing the full picture. And I can't tell you how many times that when we're presenting this for the first time and I'm sitting with an owner that's talking with their manager that is actually seeing this for the first time, that the manager, it's like, oh, this is great. Yeah, this is great for me to see, because I don't know what these numbers are, or I don't see this, and it's almost like they've been given a pat on the back to say, yes, we're gonna share this with you. We're gonna show this to you. They have their own internal numbers that they may be keeping, or their spreadsheets or whatever, but they don't see it when it comes out in a formal presentation, so to speak. And so it's almost like they're getting confirmation of, oh, yes, I am doing a good job. My number is showing this. Their number is, pretty much close to this, or maybe a little bit off. But now we're having a conversation. Now I'm part of those conversations. And it's almost like it's a pivotal point that then your managers kind of, I don't know, they, just kind of swell up with a little bit of pride and, oh, wow, they're sharing something with me, and it means a lot.
Yes.
So yeah,
People will react well. People, I think, do a better job when they know more about the job. If I'm a manager, for example, and for the first time you're showing me this is what it costs to operate our barbecue restaurant, and I'm being told that, look, you're here, you're in charge of the staff, you're putting the orders away. This is why, as an owner, I'm so concerned with how we are keeping product locked, or how we are keeping our inventory accurate, or how we're keeping our portions consistent. This is why, as an owner, I'm concerned when there's waste, over prepping, and stuff has to get thrown away. Or even something as small as, this is why, as an owner, when I walk into the dish room, I'm always glancing into the trash can to see, why is someone throwing away a small little ceramic ramekin? How come the silverware is sliding off the plates? Because see, when a manager looks at that and goes, wait a second, it costs how many hundreds of dollars a month to replace broken glasses and buy new silverware? I had no idea. See, right. So it makes people feel a little bit more involved. They can do a better job when they understand their responsibilities. And then here's the best one. It's easier to hold people accountable for something that they know they're responsible for. So once they really understand the cost of what they're responsible for, and you show them weekly how we're doing on managing those costs, it's a little bit easier to hold them accountable, especially if you want to develop a incentive program off of maybe that net operating or net controllable profit. It's easier when responsibility and accountability match. So I wanted to make sure that we spent some time on not just showing you what numbers should be, but telling you some specific examples of how you can make your business better by working with these numbers.
Absolutely.
Through the program, a couple of questions popped up, and I wanted to make sure that we save some time, and we do have time. We have another 5 or 10 minutes, folks. So if there's something you'd like revisited, a slide you'd like to study more, let us know. Or if there's a question, type it in. But somebody did have a question about automatic gratuity. And is this a good time for small restaurant operators to think about just adding an automatic 20% gratuity that could be looked at as additional compensation to help the staff? And so I thought, let's lead with that. It's not specifically an accounting line item, but it's a very, very popular topic, especially when you consider the fact that when you're not busy in your restaurants, you're a consumer. And think of all the places you've gone to now that order at the counter, or places that maybe you didn't really think of as full service where I always leave a tip. But now, because you pay with a credit card and they show you the monitor and you're prompt to put in 15, 20, 25. People do it at hairstyling. People do it at the bakery. People do it at the coffee house. Before you know it, they may be doing it at the grocery store. You want to add 10%? That's really going to get me, because I think groceries are high enough as they are. And I'm not tipping the cashier just because she rang up my groceries. But anyway, it could work in your restaurant. Yes, where you have it right there. Some of you might be using that technology now, where even if you're full service, you go to the table, you have the handheld. And so people can just click in. Do they want to do automatic 15, 20, 25%? I've seen it at a lot of the restaurants that I go to, that for years, if I called in a to-go order, I would just go pay and get my to-go order. However, through COVID, you notice how to-go doubled. Curbside pickup went crazy. Third-party delivery went crazy. Now, anytime I call, whether it's online or on the phone and I go do curbside pickup, I'm presented with a voucher to sign and there's an automatic line. Do you want to add 15, 20, 25%? So you're automatically tipping in situations that maybe years ago we didn't find ourselves tipping in. So part of me says, yes, take a look at your tipping policy. And for certain, if it is a way that you can add it to your prompt, I would add it. Now, that doesn't fully answer the question. That doesn't mean should I just automatically add it, because that's a different issue. And a lot of people have had pushback when they don't just have it as a choice for the people to fill in. They just skip the choice and they automatically add 20%. We're still getting some pushback on that. Where too many customers like the idea of tipping on their own. So therein lies the gamble. They might be leaving 20, they might be leaving more, they may be leaving less. But as a trend, most restaurants are still allowing people to decide what they're tipping and not automatically adding. But they are prompting. They're adding it to every single guest check. So people can just simply check off 15, 20, 25%. And hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I think that was a game changer actually for places that have counter service. Because yeah, I mean, as a consumer, right, you go through the line, you pay it. I mean, you shouldn't think about it, right? Because mentally, you're not sitting down, somebody's not serving you, right? You're not asking them 50 million times to go get you something. So you just don't think about it. So now that they have that, I mean, I always add a tip, but I just hadn't thought about it before. So I think it was a game changer for counter service, actually.
Yeah. And full service restaurants that did not normally collect a lot of tips on their to-go program, now they're noticing that they don't even call it a to-go program. It's curbside pickup or it's third-party delivery. And every order that goes out is getting some kind of a tip. People are either ordering online, prepaying, and it's prompting them, so they fill in a tip, or they're picking it up and they get their slip, and on the slip there's a prompt, check here for 15, 20, 25%. And so they're noticing that 90% of the time they're picking up more income to share with staff. I'd like to caution proper share with staff now. This could almost be a totally different topic where we get into things like properly handling tips and whatnot. But for those of you who are thinking, God, what a great idea, I'm going to start doing this. Let's remember now, if you're in a full service environment and you are taking advantage of the sub minimum wage, you're paying your servers the 2 something an hour or 3 an hour, because you can legally do so, providing they're claiming tips to get up to the federal mandated minimum wage. So if you are going to share the tips that they're earning, you need to be sharing them with only the portion of the staff that customarily are tippable staff. And the government defines those people as your bus staff or a bartender or the bar back. So as much as you might want to run into the kitchen and distribute that with, say, cooks, prep cooks, and dishwashers, be careful. Check with your attorney before you do so, because you may lose that sub-minimum wage exemption. There are laws on how we do tip share. But to Jane's point, for those of you who are counter service, you're running a coffee or burrito place or a barbecue restaurant and everyone orders at the counter. Your wage scale is probably all hourly wage that is higher than the federal minimum wage anyway. You're probably having to pay people $8, $9, $10 an hour. You don't have servers that are at that sub minimum. So the wages that you are collecting, they can be split equally or how you want to. So therein lies some confusion, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that if we're talking about tips, we have to distribute them correctly so you don't get yourself in trouble.
Right. It's all about that tip credit. If you're taking that tip credit on your taxes, then you have to adhere to the tip credit rules or the tip pooling rules.
We have time, I think, for another question if somebody has one. There was somebody that asked about the recommended inventory and item costing program that we referred to. So maybe we should spend a moment talking about that, because I know you've had experience with a wide variety of programs. Compete, what's it called, 360, Extra Chef, Not that we're trying to be an advertiser for a particular product, but maybe you could give people a little background of those types of technologies that's available. And if you have a recommendation, or maybe if you know approximately what that might cost for somebody to look into.
Yeah, so we utilize XtraChef as our third party pricing software, so to speak. It's really, it provides an in-depth analytical tool for the restaurant owners, so that they're not necessarily maybe having to wait on us, because it's web-based. They get a login. We're scanning their invoices in. If they have a question about an invoice, they can go look at the image. But they're great programs because you can put price tracking on things, and especially right now with the prices just all over the map. So, you know, they're not XtraChef. There's other programs out there, and I by far am not, you know, promoting XtraChef in any way, fashion, or form. It's just that's the one that we use. But there's also like Margin Edge. I know that that's another one. There's a few other ones. The pricing has seems like you said has come down. 4 or 5 years ago, the pricing on the software was much more expensive because it wasn't being utilized so much. But with COVID, restaurant owners have now moved towards a focus on their expenses, on what does the inventory cost. So all of these programs now have a much more, you know, much wider customer base, and so they've been able to bring their pricing down. I highly recommend it. I can't tell you enough how helpful it is to a restaurant owner. Because like I said, sometimes, you know, they're waiting on us to get them some numbers, but with these third-party software, they, you know, we're putting the information in there, we're maintaining the program, but they can go in and they can look at numbers. It has all kinds of analytical reports that just, you know, at the click of a button, spitting out all kinds of reports that it would take hours and hours for a restaurant owner to do, you know, by themselves in the back office with 50 million interruptions, you know, not just from employees, but from vendors. So I highly recommend them.
Well, Jane, thank you very much. Thank you so much for a really good detailed presentation. I hope this was very helpful to the listeners. I want everyone to see that their contact information is on the screen now, so you can make a note of being able to contact Jane, either she or one of her team in the future if you have further questions about knowing restaurant numbers. And how to maybe use that knowledge to help your key people run that restaurant better with you. So this has been very, very informative.